we only have two potential solutions: NATO membership, Article 5 defense, or some kind of an independent military deterrent that will be so huge and so scary that the Kremlin would reconsider whether it would reinvade again if there is a ceasefire.
You also wonder whether this is a time when Volodymyr Zelensky's skill as a politician is going to really come to the fore, because he has been remarkably good at building personal relationships with his Western allies. And his relationship with Trump is complicated, in part going back to the circumstances around Trump's first impeachment. But he has, since the election, made a real effort, and we saw them at the reopening of Notre Dame over the weekend, speaking to each other. And it does appear like his charm offensive on Trump is bearing some fruit. At the same time, it appears like Trump is sensitive to the accusation that he is some kind of poodle for Vladimir Putin. And Putin may even be alienating Donald Trump. I mean, the Kremlin was showing naked footage of Melania Trump on Russian state TV around the time of the election. That's not necessarily the best tactic to win over the president-elect.
No, I agree absolutely, and also I presume back in the winner is the successful business strategy. Success breeds success, right? So I think Ukraine needs to show some success in the field, and European allies also need to step up and show that they are willing and able to support the Ukrainian activities on the front line as well. I've noticed that Donald Trump, in his interview a couple of days ago, said that the US support for Ukraine will probably decrease, but that doesn't really necessarily mean that it will cease, but also it means that the European allies will have to produce and provide more, and that is probably quite a reasonable judgment, because for many decades, right, Europe hasn't been spending on defense hardly anything.
Just on that, though, are you not slightly concerned by some of the growing tide of, maybe you'd call it, Ukraine skepticism in some European capitals? I mean, we've obviously got the situation in Germany and elections coming up in the new year, the rise of the AfD, who are very skeptical about support for Ukraine. Obviously, instability in France. And even though President Macron has been very hawkish on Ukraine, actually, if you look at the amount of money in terms of military aid that France have provided, it pales into insignificant compared to Germany and the UK. Do you not think that actually it is a bit worrying that, yes, the Europeans need to be doing more, but sort of Ukraine's skepticism is on the rise?
I think we need to reiterate what is at stake here, right? The war is not entirely, and one argues not at all about Ukraine. In November 2021, before the full-scale invasion, the Russian state produced 2 treaty drafts and sent it to the Western capitals, which meant that the demands for the NATO withdrawal from all the countries that entered NATO in 1997. So effectively, we will go back to the boundaries before the Cold War boundaries, in which the Moscow will have been able to reestablish the sphere of influence, over Warsaw, perhaps over Berlin as well. So this is the demand that was already put forward by the Russians before the large-scale invasion of Ukraine. This is what they want. This is openly. It's actually it's a document still appears on the Russian Foreign Ministry draft treaties portal. You can still read it. So this is what they want, and Ukraine is just the first stepping stone towards that achievement of the total rebalancing, reconfiguring, remapping, and also changing the global world order. Right, the Russian state television, Putin himself, talks about multipolarity and how the so-called global south, and Russia now apparently is part of global south. I'm a geographer. I'm not sure how that works, but in any case, this kind of anti-Western alliance that he's trying to kind of create is what is rising, and so I think the Western countries need to understand that stakes is not just whatever percentage of Ukrainian Donbas territory been taken or retaken. The stakes are much higher than that, and I think the cost of Ukrainian loss and the defeat is really unimaginably bigger than people think it is.
So, what do you think, Vlad, when you hear people talk about the terms Ukraine may be prepared to accept in some kind of peace settlement? Even Volodymyr Zelensky is now talking about whether NATO membership could be offered to the parts of Ukraine that aren't currently occupied by Russia. When you hear talk like that, what is your reaction?
Well, I think Ukraine has to show that it's willing to negotiate, given that the President-elect Trump strategy was to bring peace. And of course, peace is the opposite of war to some extent. And hence, Ukraine has to show its willingness to and be flexible in be willing to discuss terms, to potential ceasefire, etc., etc. I also need to stress is that, of course, not everything is under control of the Western allies, right? A lot of things are happening on its own. The Kursk offensive of Ukrainian armed forces was an unexpected innovation, and what would be the guarantees of the Ukrainian security or of the territory that is under government control if it's not NATO membership? And I'm afraid we only have two potential solutions: NATO membership, Article 5 defense, or some kind of an independent military deterrent that will be so huge and so scary that the Kremlin would reconsider whether it would reinvade again if there is a ceasefire. And just remember, Ukraine had 3,500 tactical nuclear warheads just 20 years ago, and I kind of guess that the scientific and technological knowledge necessary for the rapid development of nuclear weapons is not lost. We have already delivery systems, right? We've seen those various types of missiles that you can produce with a range of 600 kilometers, which is just about the range between Ukraine and Moscow. So, the West should also understand is that either some kind of NATO defense umbrella is given to Ukraine as a way to assure that the territory that's under government control will be able to develop, reconstruct, rebuild, join the EU and join NATO eventually, or Ukraine will have to consider some kind of innovative solutions for its defense, because of course the situation in which there is a ceasefire and there is no assurances from anyone that the rest of Ukraine will survive is not a plausible course of action.
So just finally, Vlad, picking up on your point about the West needing to reevaluate its strategy with regards to Ukraine, if you were in a room and you had President Zelensky, General Sierski, Mark Rutte, the new Secretary General of NATO, Donald Trump, the leaders of France, Germany, and the UK, and you had to say, look, this is what we need to do, what would you want them to do?
I think we need to exploit the moments of weakness in the Russian regime at the moment, and use the hybrid warfare means as necessary. The psychological manipulation, using tactics to deepen the social divides in the country. I would say, the most astonishing as an economic geography fact is that we have 66% of Russian oil is produced in Western and Eastern Siberia and the Far East. And that's a place where only 24 million people live. So you have a chunk of Russian territory that produces as much oil as Saudi Arabia, has fewer population, but it's only 40% of Saudi Arabian GDP per capita. And unlike Saudi Arabia, Eastern and Western Siberia and Far East has enormous amount of mineral resources, water, timber, diamonds, gold, silver, anything you can think of exists there. And at the same time, you have a country that is a part of the country that is not extremely rich. And why is that? It's because, of course, Moscow exploits that resources, takes the resources, kind of internal colonization process, and uses them to live lavishly in Moscow and St. Petersburg. You've got to exploit the deep hatred of the periphery against the core, right? So you can run a TikTok campaign. Yeah, let's go for TikTok campaign in Siberia and say, well, listen, guys, you should be as rich as Saudi Arabia, but you are not. Why is that? Of course, people will tell me that, Russia is 80% mono-ethnic, so Russian. Absolutely true, and nobody says that we'll split Russia and dismember it, and that is not the goal. But the goal, like in the Russian hybrid regime, is to sow discord, is to sow discontent, right? Is to provoke tensions. That is. I mean, I would suggest doing that. Try to find the weaknesses in the regime and try to crumble it, and then it will become even more willing to negotiate and back off, because that's how you negotiate from the point of strength, right? Not from the point of weakness. This is not an escalation. Yeah, this is just a social media campaign, and you can always deny it, as the Russians deny the intervention in Moldova and Romania.
It's a really interesting point. Vlad, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, James. Thank you.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us at thetimes.com.